There, Joe Biden addressing the world from Tel Aviv. While listening to all of that was Philip Ingram, former senior military intelligence officer. Very good afternoon to you.
Afternoon, David.
Perhaps we could start by me asking you what your response is to what the president outlined. I suppose I was taken by the fact he has pledged unwavering support for Israel. He says you will have what you need. He says terrorists live in darkness and terrorists will not win.
He's 100% right. And given the horrific events that happened with the explosion at the hospital last night and the analysis that his team will have had to feed to him, he's showing a level of confidence into Israel's analysis as to what happened and backing that politically. And if we look at the wider impacts of that, it stopped a lot of the really important meetings that he was hoping to have with other Middle East leaders to try and diffuse as much of what's going on in the periphery of this war. And stop it escalating in any way, shape or form. He's got an uphill struggle, but his statements are very clear. And I think Israel will be happy with that. It highlights his thinking on global terrorism and the sorts of things that terrorists get up to around the world. They have to be stopped.
And so just in terms of this explosion at the hospital, I was saying earlier on, Israel claims it wasn't responsible. It lays blame at the Palestinian Islamic Jihad, which is a Palestinian terror group. And now just in terms of that, when you look at the footage of that explosion, Joe Biden, as you know, said it wasn't Israel, it was the other team. He must be fairly convinced by the evidence that has been put before him.
He will have been, and it's more than just the footage that's out there. If you look at the Israeli Defense Force briefing that they gave this morning in looking at it, they looked at a number of different subject areas. They looked at the pictures of what was on the ground and the damage that there was to the buildings that are around and the lack of craters that were around. They looked at the videos. They looked at the thermal analysis of the fire that's in there. That is very important because that gives you what's called measurement and signature intelligence. You can tell what's burning in the fire and therefore what caused it. They looked at the radar tracking of where the missiles had come from and that were in there. And then they had signals intelligence where they were listening into the conversations of the Hamas and other Palestinian grouping leaders describing what they'd seen. And then they could look at their own operational data to see what Israeli capabilities were in the area, what they were targeting, and whether there was the potential for anything to have gone awry and there be an accident there. And putting all of that together gave them the clear understanding that this was definitely not an Israeli accident and therefore had been an accident where a missile being fired at Israel had failed to go through its whole trajectory, something that is not uncommon. And President Biden will have had the same sort of information, but backed by access to even better information and intelligence sources, and they'll have fed him the line to make sure that he knew one way or the other, and his language was quite clear.
I thought the language was surprising, saying other team. I mean, clearly we were in a war situation. It sounded far more like a sort of sports game. In terms of that, however, though overnight we saw violent protests in the Arab world, as we were saying, also just in terms he was meant to meet other Arab leaders, of course, Egypt, the Palestinian president, Mahmoud Abbas, also in Jordan. So just in terms of the outcome of this, that's significant, isn't it? Because Joe Biden was hoping to ramp this down to get leadership support from across the Arab world.
It is. He's failing in that by the fact that they're not meeting him. And that was very important to build on what Antony Blinken, his Secretary of State, had been doing for the last 6 days in his shuttle diplomacy around different capitals. And unfortunately, putting a final stamp onto an agreement that will have been at least drafted isn't going to happen on this at this time, and that is significant because this could escalate very quickly. I think Joe Biden's clumsy language that he used when he said the other team is more down to his age and his ability to think through what he's going to say quickly rather than the meaning of what he put in there. I think that was a touch of senility.
Well, I mean, obviously, I just thought it was clumsy language, actually, in terms of what he actually said. Now, in terms of this, there's no doubt the US does have the ear of Israel because, obviously, this ground offensive hasn't taken place. We then heard the IDF yesterday saying, well, maybe we won't have a ground incursion, maybe we'll act in a very different way. Just give us an idea of what's going on in the back channels.
Well, from a ground defensive perspective, it's not something that's easy. We're 10 days, coming up to two weeks at the weekend from the Hamas terrorist attack into Israel. To put the level of ground forces together and get them into position, get them rehearsed to go across the border is something that would ordinarily take 2 to 3 weeks as a minimum in going in, and actually they'll realize the levels of preparation that Hamas has got, and Hamas has probably set this as a trap. They want Israeli ground forces to come in because they know how to maximize casualties against them. And therefore Israel has to be very careful about how it goes in, what it does, what it achieves, through what paths. That takes an awful lot of planning. And there'll be a reticence amongst the army commanders to be able to put ground forces into somewhere where they can't protect them properly and look after them. So there's a real dilemma going on in the planning process, and they'll want to understand what their clear objectives are so they can get in and deal with those and get out as quickly as possible. That's not something that you can put together in a couple of weeks, and that's why the international community in our commentary have been saying Israel's going to go in quickly and we'd expect them to do that, and they called up lots of people. But the reality is, from an army perspective, a military perspective, it takes a long, long time to get that together in a way that you can use it as safely and as coherently as possible.
And of course, the United States has urged that Netanyahu shows extreme caution in terms of moving forward. And as you say, there's this great sort of network of tunnels that they will have built in Gaza. Very difficult to go on an offensive there. And of course, at the same time, we've got 1 million people that have been told to move to southern Gaza. The Rafah crossing still not opened either. Egypt also is saying, well, hang on a minute, because Europe has been urged to take the 1 million Gazans if it cares about human rights so much. So this is Israel saying, hang on a minute, we're not taking 1 million people from Gaza, and obviously reinforcing its own defences.
Well, it's interesting. Egypt's got the ability to open that border if it wants to. None of the Arab states want to take the Palestinians. Now, what does that say about the Arab states' view of the Palestinian people? And it's the Palestinian people who are suffering because of this. Hamas does not represent them, but Hamas puts itself amongst them and puts its military capability into apartment blocks or under apartment blocks. It has its weapons manufacturing capabilities in apartment blocks close to hospitals, close to mosques. They want pictures in the international community of bodies of women and children being carried out of collapsed buildings because that suits their purpose. And they've got a fantastic information operation to try and project that out to the world, knowing that it is polarizing views in different countries around the world, and that puts real political pressure on international leaders and political pressure, therefore, into Israel, and will focus people in supporting organizations that they shouldn't necessarily support, where we get the information wrong. The international press community last night, very quickly after the explosion at the hospital, put out an Israeli strike on a hospital in Gaza when it's being proved wrong this morning. That just polarizes, and it does more than just inform people from the press. It's influencing people's views, and once someone has made their mind up, it's very difficult, even if you produce fact after fact after fact, it's very difficult to change someone's mind back again. So it's a very dangerous situation that we've got developing, and you're getting the people out. It's wrong what Israel's doing in a siege mentality in impacting the Palestinian people. I'm hoping that the negotiations from President Biden today will unlock something. There was some hope in his speech to get humanitarian relief in there, but I'm not confident that Hamas won't try and hijack a lot of that for themselves. And as soon as they do, you'll find the Israelis will close it down again.
And just in terms of what Israel does, if it doesn't then go on a ground incursion, on a ground offensive, of course, they're worried about opening a second front, aren't they, to the south of Lebanon as well, trying to move their civilians out of that side as well. So they're very concerned about being overexposed.
They are. Israel is well prepared to fight on two fronts. So it's well prepared to fight Hamas coming from Gaza and Hezbollah coming from southern Lebanon together. But it's the potential for that to ramp up even further and get greater Iranian support pushing in. And, if something starts off with Hezbollah and then brings in the wider Lebanese army, and there's the potential then for Syria to get involved. Of course, we've got Syria very closely linked, Bashar al-Assad closely linked to Russia. There's Russian capability based in Syria. Where does that stand with things? And Russia's closely linked with Iran. This is where the danger of the escalation coming is, and that's why the US are putting 2 carrier battle groups into the Eastern Mediterranean to deter that sort of escalation. It's not to help Israel with their war on Hamas.
And as you say, of course, this is on a precipice because the rest of the Middle East could well get involved. You've got the likes, as you say, of Iran, of Syria, for example, and of course the wider escalation of this in terms of the international community, of course, the United Kingdom also pledging support as well. I just wondered if you had a comment on what is going on in this country. I mean, for those people who are driving or watching TV this afternoon and are very worried about the way that the UK could get dragged into this, how worried should we be, particularly when I've been reading about places like RAF Lakenheath? Now, actually, it looks like they're putting nuclear weapons back in RAF Lakenheath, something I haven't seen since I was a child growing up there.
Well, the nuclear weapons in Lakenheath is nothing to do with this. That's part of the nuclear deterrent program that there is across the West and with NATO. UK's got a military interest in the Eastern Mediterranean. We have sovereign base areas in Cyprus, so we've got military capability based down there. That, in effect, is our permanent aircraft carrier in the region. But I think the real danger was highlighted by the head of MI6 MI5 in his comments yesterday, where he talked about the potential for the threat increasing domestically at home. And we saw the recent attacks in Belgium for an individual. There's a great danger if we look at the polarization that there is, in particular between those that are supporting the Palestinian people, those that are infiltrating, those that are supporting the Palestinian people and are actually tacitly supporting Hamas, which is a proscribed terrorist organization, and that level of support itself is an offence under the Terrorism Act, and those that their actions in the UK and elsewhere, and the UK is an open supporter of Israel. So the potential of that to stimulate some form of terrorist actions in this country is very worrying to certainly the security service, according to its head only yesterday.
Well, indeed, and of course JTAC keeping a constant eye on that, on the level of terror threat in this country. And of course the scenes of those people who are supporting a proscribed terrorist group have gone down very badly, not only with the politicians but also people in this country who are deeply concerned about the divisions being sown in this country. Should they be worried about what's going on?
I think they should be very worried about the levels of division that's going in. Unfortunately, I don't think a lot of people in this country understand that Hamas does not represent the Palestinian people, don't understand that by supporting Hamas, it's not something that they're being clever at. It's not something that they're rebelling at. They're supporting a most heinous terrorist organization that terrorizes the Palestinian people more. And if we expand this country and we look in particular into Northern Ireland, what it's doing is it's further polarizing some of the issues in Northern Ireland, because some of the Northern Irish political parties are openly supporting not just the Palestinians, but the Hamas approach to things. It's very easy to read in their language and what they're saying. And Northern Ireland remains on a precipice because of the difficult political situation that's there. And that could boil over at any stage. So we're in dangerous times, and that's why we should be keeping very vigilant, be very clear. There's nothing wrong with supporting the Palestinian people, the innocent people out of there, but there's everything wrong with supporting terrorists who are abusing them and trying to use a link to the Palestinian people as something that they can use to beat the rest of the world up with. It's not there.
And can you see a way out of this? We talked yesterday about the idea of a two-state solution, something that's been mooted for a very long time. Does it mean that actually people around the world will be concentrated on actually finding a solution, something they've kicked down the road for a long time? And I'd include Netanyahu in that.
I hope so, and I think a two-state solution is the only way forward. It's been recommended on so many occasions, as it's been looked at by so many different international bodies, and it needs to be very carefully brought together, because of course you've got the Palestinians not just in the Gaza Strip area but in the West Bank, and it's linking those in a way that you can create the two nations that would live side by side. But that, I think, is a long way off. We were getting closer to the potential for that up until 2 weeks ago when Hamas carried out the terrorist attack against Israel. Saudi Arabia was coming on side, the UAE was coming on side, normalizing relationships with Israel. That's been put back now, and we don't know how long that's been put back. This is a disaster for the development of a two-state solution, a long-term solution for issues in the Middle East.
Philip, really good to talk to you. Thank you very much indeed. That's Philip Ingram, former senior military